Hi, everybody.
Hello, welcome. Well, let's wait for everyone to get situated, and then we'll start in a minute or two.
All right.
All right, so I think we'll get started. My name is Ross Yelsey. I'm an Assistant Director of Admissions and Marketing at Columbia Journalism School. I'm really pleased to have you all here for this conversation about our part-time Master of Science program. And I'm really happy to have Professor Elena Cabral with us, who directs the MS part-time program. And what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit between us about the program, some of the aspects of the curriculum, and also some of the admissions aspects. And then we'll open it up to a conversation a little later with questions you might have. So we recommend that you write any questions you have in the chat area on the Zoom down on the bottom there. And my colleague John Graham will be looking at those, and then he will be raising some of the questions towards the last 20 or 15 minutes of our presentation. So you'll get a chance to have Professor Cabral talk to us about some of the things that might be of interest to you about the program. So to start off, Elena, maybe we'll start with just asking you about your background and what drew you at journalism in the first place.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Elena Cabral, and I run the part-time program. I also work in communications, and I run our international programs. For 10 years, I worked in the Office of Career Development. And so I always like to joke that I know the full life cycle of a journalism student, from admissions to when they get into the workplace. But I also experienced it myself. I graduated in 1999 as an MS part-time student. I was working full-time at a foundation in Midtown. And after graduating, I went on to work for the Miami Herald and Newsday. I did some magazine work. And when I was returning from the Miami Herald and I had my first child, I wasn't sure what to do with my life or my work. And so I went to the one place that I knew would help, which was Columbia. And I met with some of my mentors here, who not only sort of gave me some great ideas for freelance stories that I could do as a magazine writer, they also offered me a job as an adjunct professor. So I did that and worked as an editor at Scholastic until, the opportunity arose to continue to work at Columbia full time, which for me felt like a continuation of my journey in journalism, because we basically run a newsroom here across many platforms and on the very cutting edge of data, especially, and so it's and investigations. And so it seemed like, a really exciting step forward. And every day that I've been at Columbia now has been an exciting step forward. Every year there's something really exciting to cover. And this year was, as you know, no exception. So it's been a really exciting journey, and I am looking forward to answering your questions about that and what I know about our grads too, who've gone on to exciting jobs.
Great. Thanks, Elena. So maybe to start, we'll just go back and talk a little bit about why Columbia, established this part-time program. What was kind of the history and the purpose of offering this curriculum in this format for people?
Oh, sure. Not long ago, we celebrated the 25th anniversary of this program. And I think it was one of the decisions that Columbia made, again, sort of thinking forward, thinking broadly, and most of all, thinking inclusively, about the people that we want to see in our classrooms. As a woman of color myself, I knew that after incurring, the debt of Columbia College, where I was as an undergraduate, and finally getting a respectable job at a major foundation, like I couldn't call my parents in Texas and say, guess what, I'm gonna go to graduate school full time again. I just couldn't do that. So I realized I had to do this by myself, and I certainly didn't want to ask them for help. It's just not something that we do in my family, after my parents had worked a lifetime to raise 5 kids and put them through college. So I had to really think quick. And I also knew that I just didn't have the wherewithal or the contacts or the the name recognition, to go knocking on people's doors to say, hey, will you hire me as a cub reporter in your newsroom? And I had enough experience as a freelancer or trying to freelance to know that, I was an unknown entity and that those doors were always going to be closed to me. And I'm not the only one, really. It happens to a lot of us. It's a very closed, fluid, but broad industry. And what I needed most was a guide, a coach, a writing coach, a career coach, and all of those other things to just get me in. And that's basically what I found at Columbia. But I had to work full time. In fact, the company that I was working for, the foundation that I was working for, was paying for the degree. So there was no way that I could lower my hours. It was a tricky thing to figure out at first. What I did know was that I needed flexibility in my schedule, that I needed to be able to not only find the class time, but the reporting time. And as I like to say to everyone who applies to Columbia, it's not a night school. So even though you can take classes at night and still graduate, you really do miss out on a lot if you don't have some flexibility there to obviously cover stories that are going to require daytime business hours, but also take advantage of all the really cool stuff that happens at school during the day, from lectures to workshops to hackathons to, all sorts of speakers, people that are not just, um, workers and reporters and editors in the field, but newsmakers. I always fondly think back of the time that Ruth Bader Ginsburg appeared at the school to talk about the what eventually became an Oscar-nominated documentary about her life by one of our professor emeritus, Betsy West. And it was a major event, and it was really cool that she was at the journalism school, especially as a grad of the law school. And so those are the kinds of things that I knew I had to clear my schedule for. And that's very much the case with our students now. The way the curriculum is set up allows you to do that, because instead of having to take a concentration of classes in the fall and spring, as our full-time students do, we spread that out over 5 semesters. So you essentially take 1, maybe 2 classes per semester. And those generally will call for an hour and a half or 2 hours of class time in the fall anyway. And, and then somewhere between 6 to 8 hours of reporting time. That's usually what I needed, because I tend to overthink stories, and I ask a lot, I do a ton of interviews, and I'm a slow writer. So what I would do was write at night. Then, in the spring, however, when our students, as they're currently doing, looking at a slate of classes to choose from, they will see that there are a good number of options at night to take in our spring classes, which include an array of 15-week intensive classes called seminar and production classes. They're called that because part of it is a seminar where you hear from people, in the field, world-class documentarians and book authors and photographers, education reporters and the like, depending on which class you take. And then you produce a podcast, you produce, a video broadcast, you produce, a weekly set of stories around the initial weeks of the administration, or you're doing an investigation. In past years, it was on Trump's finances and stuff. So there's a seminar part and there's a production part, and therefore it's going to ask you for class time. There are some marquee classes that I like to call, such as Sam Friedman's book writing class, that may ask you for a full day. Actually, I audited that class, which meant that I sat in on that class for free, meaning I wasn't billed for it. But I had to get a full day from work, because Sam Friedman, the professor of that class, longtime professor, insists that if you're going to sit in that room, you got to do the reading and you have to participate in the lectures. You can't just be a fly on the wall. And so I calculated that that if I needed one full day of class for a 15-week semester, that's basically 2 weeks of vacation and change. I asked my employer for it because I'd been there long enough to, one, earn the tuition benefit, and two, be able to let them know that I could definitely make up the work. Now, was it a lot of work? Yes, it was like having 2 full-time jobs, but I always look back on the 2 years as 2 of the happiest years of my life because I was really getting that coaching that I wanted. I was really locking myself into a network of professionals that eventually became people who became part of my professional family for the rest of my working life. And that's still very much the case. I certainly have relied on them to invite them back to our Career Expo, which is the biggest journalism job fair anywhere, in the spring. And I relied on them to, consider hiring our students. It wasn't a terribly difficult task because as graduates themselves, or even as competitors, they knew of mine. They knew what they were getting with a Columbia graduate. And so it was an easier introduction to make, not something I needed to convince them of. But not just that. Students accumulate, this is a professional school after all, a portfolio of work that they can show in the spring. For part-timers, it's a really cool thing because not only can they get a taste of the Expo in their first year, their first spring with us as volunteers to help hand out name tags or to escort recruiters to their tables. They can then, participate in the walk-up period from 2 to 5 p.m. and get to meet some of the recruiters and maybe sell their master's project ideas or sell a few freelance ideas or just get a sense of what's up and coming in terms of new products, new startups, et cetera. Get a sense of the field and get to know these recruiters who come back, as I said, again and again each year, very familiar faces each year. And then the second year, they participate in earnest by submitting their resume, which has been, overhauled half a dozen times by the career staff, enlarged and enriched with new stories and new projects. And then they submit a survey, a detailed survey, along with the recruiters who also answer a detailed survey. And it's sort of like a speed dating thing. We match them for 20-minute interviews based on the answers to those questions. And it's a very intense experience. I encourage you to visit the careers page to get a sense of it. There's a cool video there. And our part-timers tend to, be very prepared at that point because they know what to expect. They've had 2 years to really polish their resume, get to know a lot of the industry types in a media capital like New York City. And, the quality of work is fresh and new and interesting and is, something that I think they're really proud of. That's how I ended up through the Career Expo at the Miami Herald, which is one of the really, wonderful places to go to as a cub reporter because it's very emblematic of the type of internships we put students in. When you're in college, you do an internship, you kind of sit around a newsroom and observe and maybe get to follow a reporter a little for a while, and then they kick you back to school. They expect you to go back to school. Not so much with our internships at this level. Before I went to the Miami Herald, I did my homework and I knew that this was very much the way that the Herald hires its staff, and that if I did really good work, showed up, said yes, really showed the dedication and didn't burn the building down, that I was going to get hired. And that's what happened. And it took a big leap of faith, as I like to say, because I was taking a pay cut. I was moving away from a foundation world that I thought, was of the place where I could change the world. But what I realized was, and then many of you might be thinking about this yourselves, that if I really wanted to do the kind of work that has real impact, real time impact, in fact, and I think that no other year in our recent history might exemplify just how much impact journalism can have in changing the world and holding truth to power. It's this profession. And whatever I was giving up with my cushy foundation job was going to be worth it. And it absolutely was one of the best decisions that I've ever made. And hopefully you'll hear from other part-timers as we do another couple more, I think, information sessions, that very same feeling of getting into the public sphere more directly. It's a somewhat intimidating process because you are very much a public figure. Certain things kind of have to change, including maybe your social media feeds, and you're guided through the type of subculture that journalists adhere to in terms of not so much objectivity, but neutrality and fairness, thoroughness, verification, understanding more than anything why words matter. And it helps you in any job you take, in your relationships, in the way that you negotiate things. I think that I learned a great deal about how to live my life as a responsible adult having done this program. And I really think that 2 years is the minimum we should have for this thing, because it is so enriching and so much fun. And I think that you probably will find in the end that it's quite fleeting, but quite the game changer in terms of putting you in the right path to a meaningful career, or even in many cases a new career, taking everything you learned from school and work up until now, maybe from your personal backgrounds, as the children of immigrants perhaps, or as doctors, attorneys, people working in nonprofits, taking all of that knowledge, not throwing it away. I always like to say journalists are like squirrels. We don't throw anything away. We use it to help us understand how to do this job, and put it to good use here. In other words, you're not throwing away, or in case you have some parents, some skeptical parents to convince, what you're doing is moving forward and taking everything that you brought to this point with you. And it's a great ride.
Great. I think that's a great overview, Elena. I have a question then about, for people who are watching this or who might view this later, who are thinking about the part-time program, who is it kind of best suited for? Sometimes we hear from people who are living elsewhere, like in Seattle, who or in India or someplace, and they are looking at this program. Would it make sense for people who maybe don't have a career in New York to do the part-time program? Who would be the ideal fit for the curriculum we provide?
I would say that historically, the program was best suited for people who were already working and living in New York City, because they can jump in and navigate this program that is really meant for people who have an anchor in a job already, and that's why they need to take the classes in a slower pace and at night, right? Though not always at night. And so that's what it was ultimately designed for. But what I have noticed running this program over many years now is that increasingly we've had people come to us from other parts of the country. Unfortunately, if you are living in and you have a nationality outside the United States, unless you have a US citizenship or a special visa that allows you to work and study for 2 years, the part-time program is not for you. But you can think about the full-time programs, certainly. So I do think that it's ideal it can be ideal for someone who's moving, who already sort of hasn't the intention of moving to New York. But my advice is don't roll the dice and apply without really looking very closely at jobs. I mean, applying for those jobs sooner rather than later, and creating a budget. Because what we find across the board is that students tend to underestimate how expensive New York City is. There was an article recently that showed how many people have sort of left New York City, at least during the pandemic, and how many vacancies there are in apartments and how those apartment rates have gone down. Now, I don't know if that's still the case, but what I do know is that overall and across the nation, As someone who lived and grew up in Texas and lived in Florida for many years, there's a big differential in the cost of living that you can look up online and try to gauge based on your expected salary, whether you can survive and eat. You know, those are two very important things. Graduate school is hard, but you still have to nourish yourself, right? So I would look at all of those things, and I'm happy to talk through with anyone who's sort of in that position of wanting to move, get a job, apply to grad school at the same time, because it doesn't always quite work out. Now, does that mean you can't ever do this program? No, I think that means that you put a pin in it and then you make those moves, you take the job, preferably a full-time job, but sometimes a part-time job is good. We have a number of students who work nights in newsrooms, and you know, they do this program. They don't sleep a lot, but they do it. I mean, nobody ever sleeps in graduate school anyway, so it's fine. And I don't think that most of the country is sleeping very much anyway. So this is the sort of job that teaches you. I did it when I was 27 years old, and I don't remember sleeping very much, but I do remember just having, you know, a lot of adrenaline, a lot of excitement, a lot of fear of getting it wrong. And then being reassured that someone was going to be able to help me fix those mistakes so that I don't make them ever again. And so, yes, I do think that, you know, sometimes students will come to New York City and work as bartenders or wait staff, you know, that and work in the service industry. Please remember that we are in a pandemic and that those jobs, you know, may not be able to keep you, at least for the time being, you know, very secure. We're going to have to look at everything right now. So you also want to look at the pandemic broadly, listen to news reports, which you're going to have to do anyway, because one of the things that we expect from students is that they really ingest a good diet of media, of news from all different platforms every day. You know, once you sort of become what we lovingly refer to as journalism junkies, you know, it really becomes a part of the subculture. So pay attention to the prognostications about the vaccine and what places like New York City with the high population rates expect to see. We're very cautiously optimistic because, knock on wood, we've done very well so far as an institution. But, you know, it's important to know that we don't have control over what happens in the city broadly, and that, you know, you should take that into consideration as well. But still, be optimistic, plan for the future, think about all of the contingencies and all of the support systems that you have in place to help you get through a program like this. And know that we as an institution have your back as well, so that at any point, if we had to, we would go virtual, as we had to in a flash when in March it became necessary to do so. And we have experience in doing that now. In fact, I think there are elements of Zoom that we should actually keep in place. For example, in the Expo, which we had to cancel as an in-person event, it was interesting to see that recruiters from as far as Los Angeles and other places which normally wouldn't send a recruiter, sent people to talk to our students and interview them, which I thought was really neat. So I think we should always keep an element of that. And in our classrooms, I noticed that there were speakers, you know, generally like really cool journalists that might not otherwise have the time or the wherewithal to travel to New York City to talk to our students, were available and became available. And so it was a really neat experience to have them, even if it was just, you know, on a Zoom call, speaking to this particular audience of young journalists was really special. So, you know, we do feel that we can move forward whatever happens. And it makes sense because journalism doesn't stop.
Thanks, Elena. And then for, you know, you mentioned earlier that we have a lot of people who are working in journalism already who are in the part-time program, they're in newsrooms. But we also have people coming from other professions like medicine or law or finance or teaching or other things. What would you look for in an applicant for the program who's coming from another background? What kind of goals should they have in mind for doing the part-time program to succeed well in the curriculum we provide?
Well, I think that they should have a good idea of what they want to do with the degree, and not just a general sense that they want to be in journalism, or they want to be in television news. You know, journalism has changed so much that those categories just are very limited. If you look very closely at our faculty list, if you look very closely just at the front page of the New York Times, and look at the various platforms they have, you know, by the way, when we interview the Times to ask them, and Washington Post and a bunch of startups about the kind of jobs and skills they're looking for, it changes every year. It feels like, you know, one year the Times might be looking for programmers to do a lot of the cool interactives that they have, or they might be looking for Snapchat editors to help push stories out on new platforms. But the one thing that I think will always be consistent, no matter what technical field you go into, whether it's as a data reporter or as a video producer or a podcast producer, is going to be that very, very intense training in reporting and writing. For more than 100 years, that's what we've done better than anybody, I think. And so that's always going to be the center of our curriculum. And sort of why I refer to it as a writing coach and a reporting coach, because everybody takes these classes first. And no matter where you are on the spectrum, whether you have, you know, no experience to 15 years of experience, you're going to learn something. So what I would say is that in your essays, that you really sort of like think about the kind of storytelling that you'd like to do, whether it's investigative, audio, video, documentary, and perhaps even, you know, get a sense of among our faculty, who you can look up on our page and Google and say, you know, I really want to study with, you know, Sally Herships, you know, who's a terrific radio reporter, or Daniel Alarcon, who started up an excellent radio program called Radio Ambulante, which became part of NPR. And, you know, the type of storytelling that he does is really original and interesting. It pushes the envelope in many ways of journalism. And then, of course, long form magazine, thank goodness, is not dead. It's still alive and well, but perhaps maybe more digital than print. We don't use the word print a lot of the time, although, you know, many people do still prefer to get their news that way. But, you know, the other day I was really wanting to read a really great analysis on the New Yorker, and just didn't have the time to sit down and read it. So I was so delighted to see that there was an audio version of it, and clicked on it right away. And you know, was still, you know, was so happy to be able to do the dishes and watch the dog, and as I was listening to it. And so, you know, think about what inspires you, motivates you to listen and learn and get excited or angry about stories that you hear, and be ambitious in your descriptions of what it is that you want to do, because it is Columbia after all. And, you know, what I like to tell people is that it's that with hard work and, you know, dedication, meaning you show up and you introduce yourselves, you become known to our faculty and to our staff, anything is possible. I really love the video on the part-time page of our website, which you can find pretty easily going through the MS program link, of Vladimir Dutier talking about his transition from 17 years on Wall Street as a banker into journalism, which everyone thought he was crazy to do, and really aiming high, you know, really wasn't at the age or the professional experience level to start at the bottom with an entry-level job, and needed to really work it to get, you know, a job that was going to be worth it to him. And he absolutely did. It was a combination of hard work, the fact that he has a language ability, that our reporting professor piped up during a tour of CNN and said, "Hey, Anderson Cooper, Vladimir Dutier is going to be an intern here. You guys should get together." That, and of course, the Career Services Office putting him in that internship, that ended up getting him on a plane to Port-au-Prince during the Haiti earthquake with Anderson Cooper, who remembered that he was the son of Haitian immigrants and spoke some Creole, to then becoming a correspondent for CNN, a national correspondent for CBS, and someone who frequently stood in for anchors of the morning show and even in the evening news on CBS. And a great friend to us as a school, always says yes when we ask him to talk to our students and give them advice. So, you know, I mentioned sort of like the journalism junkie, the type of person who just is really immersed in news, but also has a good sense of themselves and knows how to ask hard questions, not the softball questions that you do sometimes unfortunately see on some of those morning shows or on Fox News, you know, but perhaps less so on Fox News, I'm happy to say. But someone who's sort of like thinking, you know, as I like to just like describe myself, an angry mom, you know, like what's up with the, you know, this virtual learning or the these new curricula that I can't even work at. I sort of think about the things that bother me, things that I'm worried about, and want to pursue and want to be able to help others figure out and understand and grasp. And then I look at the curriculum and I look at the faculty, and it sort of comes together. And hopefully in writing your essays, you can put those pieces together yourself. Remember that the people who read those applications are journalists who understand better than anybody how messy life can be. And so, and also understand when someone's telling us something that they think we want to hear versus just the truth. So enjoy the process of writing that essay. It is a journey of self-discovery to say, oh my gosh, you know, I do want to write about women in politics, you know, or in business, and that's sort of where I'm headed. Or I've always wanted to do a podcast, you know, and you know, there have been several things in my life, from where I grew up to my English teacher in high school to my college advisor, or to working in an internship in college, that have been directing me to the journalism school. And we'd like to hear that story. If nothing else, we love a good story, well told.
Great. That's really helpful. And in terms of the background of the students that come to the part-time program, you've mentioned, you know, they come from all sorts of backgrounds professionally. Also in terms of age, I think some people are curious, you know, is someone too advanced in age to do this program, or what's the mix of potentially the age range you have right now in the part-time?
Well, it's interesting. When I did the program in the late 1990s, I was 27 years old when I started, 29 when I graduated. And that was about the average age at that time, as if I'm recalling correctly. I'm seeing overall, this includes part-time and full-time. Please correct me if I'm wrong, John, but I think that the age is skewing younger at the moment overall. But the cool thing about the part-time program is that we have people from all ages. So the average age is sort of a little, you know, difficult to pinpoint, because we do have students right out of school, right, who actually bring a ton of, you know, skills themselves, just because maybe they majored in journalism at an institution that had some really great, you know, classes and equipment and even some coding skills. And then we have the career changers who may range in age from 25 to 35, that have the MD, that have the law degree, that have been working at the top or the middle of their fields, in government, in nonprofits, as community organizers. It really runs the gamut. It's quite interesting. Like I said, I think the one thing that brings them together is just the deep desire to write and to make some change for the better in their communities, in their country, and in the world. And, you know, we also have folks who are somewhat at the end of their careers, who just want to pursue this degree as a lifetime goal. Sometimes, you know, we forget that you're getting a master's degree, which means you can be eligible to teach with this degree, which I discovered when I was offered the job to join our adjunct faculty, that MS degree that I had earned here was actually a really good thing to have in academia. And so they're determined to get a boost in the types of writing they'd like to do. remember, we do have that book writing course that is always such a wonderful opportunity. And by the way, part-timers have 2 opportunities to get into this class, which is a selective class, meaning you have to pitch a book idea to get in. And if you don't get in the first year, you can try again the second year. And then save up your vacation days at that to make sure that you really have the time to do it, even if you're doing it just as an auditor. So yes, it's the entry point is whenever. It's never too late to do a journalism degree, in my view.
Great. And then for people who are watching this and are thinking seriously about doing the part-time program, what might you recommend if they're accepted to the program? What should they start to plan ahead for in terms of thinking about how to allocate time to do the coursework, to have conversations with their employer or colleagues about what they might be pursuing?
Yeah, it's absolutely important that you have a real openness with your employer and your coworkers if needed. It really depends on the type of job that you have. And gain their support. Frankly, sometimes it's a conversation where as you're talking about the skills that you'll be learning, whether it's like, social media, using social media as a reporting tool, verification tool, sending out a message. I mean, every institution has a message to give out. Like, it may actually, make your supervisor happy to know that you're, going to be getting, the kind of training that you're getting, because you can use it almost anywhere. And you're paying for it, or hopefully maybe they might kick in a few bucks too. But more than anything, transparency over the amount of time that this is going to take is important. And again, what I like to say is that in addition to the class time, so let's say every Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. 6 p.m. is usually a good start time. So you want to make sure you can get to campus by 6 o'clock. Occasionally when there's especially during the pandemic, when there is something that might be happening during the city that might delay you, certainly our faculty members recognize that and aren't punitive about it. But some of our classes are only 7 weeks long, so you don't want to miss even one of those classes. In the past and in general, we'll soon return to it when things get back to normal. We have a very strict attendance policy, so it's important, and it's for your sake as well, so that you get your money's worth. But asking for that class time and knowing that you're going to need on average 6 to 8 hours, depending on your skill level and your knowledge of New York City agencies, neighborhoods, languages, policies, that you factor in 6 to 8 hours of reporting and writing. So that's together, reporting and writing, the number of phone calls you're going to make per week, and the amount of time you're going to need to write the story. You can count on about weekly assignments of some sort. They may be just, small exercises, but at the heart of them, they should be stories, and they have to be original stories. No one is going to hand you the idea. We don't spoon feed those to our to our students by the faculty, because that's not how a newsroom works. Plus, we know that recruiters want and need and look for in our students stories that you can't find anywhere else. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of reporters crawling around New York City as there were back in the day, just because of, cutbacks and so forth. So our students have the great opportunity, especially if they live in some of the boroughs that are undercovered, the chance to break news stories, which they have done and continue to do. And they just have to sort of learn what makes a story newsworthy. They pitch those, usually on a weekly basis, but sometimes they sort of put together what's called a beat memo, and they sort of fill it with all of these things. And as New Yorkers, they kind of have to take a closer look at the city than they generally have had in the past to see what's new and interesting. What's really new and interesting during the era of this pandemic is how it's changed our city fundamentally, but also on the flip side, how resilient and united our communities have become, and in many ways showed a lot of creativity, in the way that they've learned to survive and stick together and continue with little rituals of life. And the other day over the weekend, I was visiting the Hudson Yards, which I'd not seen first. And there was this thing called the Vessel, and next to it, which is a sort of sculpture that you can climb. And next to it was a very intense soul cycle session going on that was very quiet. And I couldn't realize until I looked closer that everyone had headphones on and were, you know, speaking into little mics. Because, you know, generally, if you've ever sat in a soul cycle session, it's loud. And this one was just a whisper, but with like 50 people on bikes in the middle of this plaza. And I just thought, oh, and interesting, you know. And then there was a giant screen playing the Augusta tournament with lawn chairs for New Yorkers to sit on for free. And, you know, it's just an interesting place to be. And that's a story, you know. That's a story. How do you get free stuff in a pandemic? Just as ordinary New Yorkers, you know? And if you're the type of person who, you know, sees that behind every corner on your commute to work or taking your kids to school, then you're going to really be able to minimize that 6 to 8 hours of looking at time at you know, your reporting time. Because this is a, you know, well, it always is, even when there's not a pandemic, a city with a million stories. So please plan ahead for that. And on top of the 6 to 8 hours, try to make yourself available for the sessions that happen as, you know, extras during the course of a week. Every Sunday, we give students an email that says, "This week at the journalism school." And in that email is a calendar of every event that is going to happen. Actually, there are a few things that kind of, you know, squeak in under the radar that the Brown Institute or the Tao Center might be doing that didn't make it into the calendar. But for the most part, it'll give you a sense of all of the public events that you're invited to. Not even the full-timers can handle all of them, can go to all of them, because they might be in class or they might be following, you know, a source. But you can at least attend 1 or 2 of them. And that is the goal. So look at your schedule, talk to your supervisor, convince them about why this is a good investment to make in you as an employee. And then when you graduate, you can leave the job and we'll help you make that leap.
Great. And speaking of that, before we go to the questions in the chat, I have one last question about career paths of part-time graduates. You already mentioned Vladimir Duthier and CBS News. Where are some of the other places that our alums are working now who've gone through the part-time?
Oh, it really runs the gamut, you know. Some of them even, you know, to add another element of that career path, might actually apply for and join one of our postgraduate fellowships. You know, we are a school, but we're also an employer, and we also do collaborations with investigative programs, as we did this year through our Columbia Investigations program. If you Google that, you'll see that some of our students got into a really interesting project with USA Today, led by experienced journalists, in which they helped to document what is essentially a brewing mental health crisis in states that have been hit hard because of climate change, with hurricanes and wildfires. But really looked at that piece, that one piece about mental health. And it was really a very prescient thing to do, because the pandemic certainly put a spotlight on this issue as well. And, you know, it got a lot of attention. As head of the communications office, I had a really great honor to help promote the findings of this report to the world, because it is important and it is a big story, really. In other cases, students worked, for example, with Sally Herships to do a really cool investigative podcast called The Heist that really focused on Donald Trump's tax policy and how exactly it benefited, or who exactly it benefited in this country and who it hurt. And it was a very in-depth type of podcast that introduces you to all the major players. It's very informative. And, you know, students worked on that as well. So in addition to that, they learned through our Career Expo that there are a lot of fellowships, internships, but not like the kind you had in college, and jobs at both legacy companies like the New York Times and the Washington Post, the Associated Press. They tend to be more formalized because the Times doesn't generally hire people right out of journalism school unless they have some very special skills. They generally like to try to, work with them, get to know them, send them out into the world, and then steal them from other newspapers when they do amazing work. But it's a competitive world, which is what makes it very exciting. It makes everybody work at the top of their game. It's a very fluid industry, and so students tend to work at different companies along the way, as journalists do over the course of a lifetime, which is so exciting because nobody ever wants to stay in one place or one city or one beat. That's what makes journalism so exciting, is that you can move around and learn a lot, and you get a lot of guidance and just learning by yourself on the street about a certain city or community or beat. Or some of them may join, radio programs such as WNYC or NPR, This American Life. And they may also do internships like the Associated Press Global News Internship, which places students in bureaus around the world. You'll be interested to know the Associated Press actually requires that students have video experience to do this internship, which gives you a sense of, how the usual markers of broadcast, print, and audio have really shifted, so that you kind of need to be able to do it all, and you can learn all of it at a place like Columbia, or at least a good deal of knowledge in each of these fields, based mostly on your reporting and writing skills more than anything, as I said before. And so they may end up chatting with somebody at the Career Expo just because they happen to be free and that person, doesn't have a long line, and then realize that, wow, their master's project is a really good fit for, a podcast that the company happens to be working on about, working moms or gun enthusiasts or some other type of subculture. And then, or they might find someone who's really interested in their book idea, but publishing it as a long form magazine piece first, which happens. And so they go in a number of different directions, and part-timers generally do really well because they're very grounded in New York City, and or they might be willing to move other places. Having that willingness is a good idea, especially if you sort of have lived in New York City for a while and would like to try someplace like Milwaukee or Austin, Texas, or Denver, Colorado, or Atlanta, Georgia. Those are destinations that I think are very good training grounds for people to, think about restarting the career and, getting to be a big fish in a maybe smaller pond. At the Miami Herald, it was really interesting because while I felt like a hot shot going in, it was the Miami Herald, and so there was a lot of intimidation there. I always joke that on my very first day, they didn't even show me how to use the phone. I had to figure that out myself. But what I did know was I knew what I was doing in terms of the reporting and writing, and that for as competitive and tough as it is as a market, because I had to go up against the Sun Sentinel, the New York Times, every other major bureau, every other major media organization that has a bureau in South Florida, which I think to a certain extent is still the case because it is one of those states that never ceased to provide national and international news, that I could be just scared enough to do my very best, but confident enough to know that I knew what I was doing. So yes, the directions are limitless, but it's up to you to answer that survey correctly that we ask you about when you go into the Career Expo. If there's a spouse or a kid or a job that is keeping you in New York City and you can't really leave for a while, it's good to let us know that, so that we can then try to put a portfolio of interviews for you and applications, so that you're not wasting your time applying for something that you can't do in place. It's really all about communication, letting your professor, your career counselor, someone like me, who's your de facto counselor as the head of the part-time program, have a sense of who you are, what your goals are, what your limitations might be, and letting us, help you figure out a career path that works.
Thank you, Elena. And John, do you have any questions in the chat that people would like us to discuss?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think most of them have been covered by you, Elena. So thank you so much. That was tremendous. I think what people are really curious about right now are these specializations and specialized degrees that we offer. So as of right now, part-time students can only apply for one specialization, which is the Stabile specialization. And so the question is, when somebody wants to do a part-time Stabile program, how amenable is that program for a person who's working full-time? Will there be conflicts? Is there a little more to navigate for that particular specialization?
Well, if you're working full-time, it depends on what you mean by full-time. If you have like a regular 9-to-5 job that really does end, isn't going to, stretch that to a 14-hour day, then yes, it's absolutely doable, given maybe 6 to 8 hours could be a bit of a understatement with regard to Stabile, because there are certain other skill sets that need some practice and some mastery, so that you're talking maybe more like 10 to 12 hours possibly. But yes, it is possible. We don't get a lot of Stabile part-time students, to be very honest with you, but it is open. When you check that box, the Stabile box, there's another box next to it that says, if you don't get into Stabile, do you still want to do the MS program? I strongly encourage you to check that box, because I do feel that even when you're not a Stabile student, most of our classes focus on investigative skills to a certain extent, and some of them in a very direct way, such as Charlie and Ornstein's Investigating Healthcare. That's a class that's not just for Stabile students, you see. So you do get some extras in the Stabile program, the biggest extra of all being the direct training from the very famous Sheila Coronel. But it doesn't mean that you can't apply for investigative jobs. You just have to select the right classes.
Thank you. And then for individuals who would want to do something, like do filmmaking in a journalistic fashion, or who want to do more data-driven reporting, our data program is only full-time, the documentary program is only full-time. Are there classes available for those students so that they can take classes in data or documentary filmmaking, so that they can leave with those skills post-graduation?
Yes, absolutely. There is a category of class that is required of everyone called image and sound. And in that bucket of classes to choose from, data is included with video, with audio, with photography. Problem is, you got to choose just one. But you can learn some basic skills, and then you can put them into practice, in some cases informally, by going to one of Mark Hansen's hackathons, or, but more than anything, putting them into play in a class, yourself after taking that class. My advice is never to take a class in isolation and then never put it into practice, anything you learn from it. Try to choose a class right after taking your data, image, and sound that's going to actually allow you to use those classes. Be smart about the sequence in which you choose to take these classes if you're serious about it. It's not just about learning a little bit of that and a little bit of that. It's about mastering those skills, right? And doing so, with a course selection, even if you're just auditing the course and sitting in on it for free. One of the fundamental differences between part-time and full-time is that part-timers are billed on a per class basis as opposed to a flat rate that the full-timers pay for the fall and the spring. So you're billed for the 6 credits that you might take of your, master's project, let's say. But in that time, if you happen to have the time to be able to sit in on a class, you just ask the professor. It's a very informal arrangement. You're not billed for that class. You're only billed for the class that you're actually taking for a grade. And so the sky's the limit. People tend to like get very wide eyes and want to take a whole ton of classes, as auditors, and then they realize, oh, that's a lot. So be judicious and think about what's going to help you the most, not just be sort of interesting to sit in on, but it's actually going to build that skill set, a little more, even if you're just watching and taking notes. You can't submit any work as an auditor for editing or for feedback, but you still can absorb quite a bit. When I sat in on Sam Friedman's book writing class, I still feel like that file that I have in my house of the book proposal that is supposed to be the end product, and all of the notes and lists of agents and things like that was such a gold mine to have. I was like, really? It was like getting a super sale, at Nordstrom's and running out going, oh my God, I can't believe I just scored this. And it was also just getting to know the professor really well and understanding the philosophy of teaching there that helped me to understand I was really making a mentor, for life, especially for women in this field. It's hard to create those mentorships, but when they start at a place like Columbia, it really does help to ground you in this industry with someone that is going to have your back, especially if you do good work. Because I sat in faculty meetings where you hear professors bragging about their star students and who's gone on to do what, and I always feel very proud of that, in the sense that I know that they have really invested in their students and in their success.
Thank you so much. Those are the questions we have. I really appreciate it.
All right, so thank you everyone for attending today. Thank you, Elena, for talking about the program in such depth.
Sure, let me just type in for everyone my email address in case you'd like to follow up with other questions. You can find it on the website, but this is a good way to reach me if you'd like to just talk a little bit about your story and or if you have any doubts or concerns about applying now versus later, or which program you think is suitable. Sometimes people ask me, should I be applying to the MA program or the MS program? And that's that really depends on your experience. But remember, the MA doesn't have a part-time option, only the MS degree.
Thanks, Elena. And to remind people, the due date for our application for the part-time and the full-time MS program is December 15th this year. So we have about a month right now to complete that application. And if you have other questions, reach out to us too at apply.journalism@columbia.edu as well. And thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.